Liberals were people who also believed, frankly, in the supremacy of white people, but they did not necessarily believe that it was necessary for white people to be heavy-handed in their dealings with non-white people. So liberals tended to be less dangerous overtly to black people and other non-whites than their conservative counterparts amongst white people. Now, these two groups of white ideologues, the conservatives and the liberals, tended to activate and express themselves through two political parties. Although each of them, conservatives and liberals, had their own respective parties, they were what were referred to as minor parties, not able by themselves to really move an agenda or take charge of anything, could not gain power. So the way that both the conservative parties and conservatives and the liberal party and liberals would try to move their respective agendas in the larger political arena was through one or the other of the two major parties. Thus it was that we find that the conservatives and the conservative party tended to express themselves through whatever influence they could wield within the Republican Party, whereas the liberal element in this country tended to express themselves and move their agenda to the extent they could through the vehicle of the Democratic Party. So we had these two ideological schools of thought amongst white people with a vehicle through which to wrest control, or challenge for control, I should say, of the political mechanism in this country, which is the means by which one group of people versus another group of people gain the upper hand, and through that process they can control the affairs of government and of everything that government influences in the society. Now, black people are pretty much aware of this division between Democrats and Republicans. They definitely are aware of Democrats and Republicans, or Republicans and Democrats. To a lesser extent, some of us are also aware of liberals and conservatives, or conservatives and liberals. And some of us are even aware of what I just explained about the connection between conservatives and Republicans and liberals and Democrats. What we are not necessarily attuned to, even though it directly affects us more than the other, is that within the context of the black community and black people, we have a similar divide. So whereas Republicans, or I should say white people, are separated between conservatives and liberals, and correspondingly Republicans and Democrats, black people essentially are divided into groups, one of which are people who fundamentally believe in self-determination and self-reliance, versus another school of thought, philosophically, which believes in dependency. Now, the difference should be obvious, but let me explain it for those for whom it might not be so obvious. Those who believe in self-determination and self-reliance believe that irrespective of how we got into the predicament that we're in, that is to say, irrespective of who was at fault for causing us to be in this position, it is fundamentally the responsibility of black people to get ourselves out of that situation, if indeed we want to be out of that situation. The opposing point of view amongst and within our own race are those people who I say believe in dependency, because those people believe that the only way to solve the problems of black people is by getting white people to be more kindly disposed towards black people. In other words, they see us as never really getting out of a position of having to depend on white people for everything that we need and want, and therefore what we should do is put as much pressure on white people as we can to get white people to be more willing to share what they have with us. But it still leaves us in the same relative position, or the same position relative to white people. It leaves us in a dependent position, and it leaves them in a superior position where it's up to them to decide, based on whatever they base those decisions on, how much of whatever to share more of or less of with black people. So the two divisions of philosophical thought amongst black people is self-reliance and self-determination on the one hand, dependency on the other. These two schools of thought and people who express and believe in them thus express themselves through vehicles also. The more, shall we say, self-reliance and self-determination advocates amongst black people express ourselves through the ideology of black nationalism. It means essentially that we consider black people in America to constitute a nation within a nation, in much the same way as Jewish people see themselves as being a nation of Jewish people within any other nation where they happen to be found. The Jewish community in America considers itself to be a nation within a nation. They may not say that, but functionally, everything about them says it for them. Chinese feel the same way. Any other ethnic group in this country, except black people or people of African descent, tends to see themselves in that context, you see. The opposing group, the integrationists and the assimilationists, or the people who believe in dependency, tend to manifest themselves through efforts to integrate into and assimilate with white people. In other words, wherever white people are and whatever white people are doing, the dependency-minded black people want to mix and mingle with them and be embraced and held to the chest or to the breast, as the case may be. So on the one hand, then, amongst black people, just as you have conservatives versus liberals and Republicans versus Democrats amongst white people, in the black community, you have self-determinist and self-reliance advocates versus dependency believers, and they express themselves through the vehicle of black nationalism, if you believe in self-reliance and self-determination and unity amongst black people. If you embrace, for example, the 7 principles of Kawaida, if you believe in the 7 rules of Ma'at, then that puts you in the black nationalist and the Pan-Africanist camp because you believe in self-determination and self-reliance. That it's we are responsible for lifting ourselves by our own bootstraps, you see. On the other hand, if you believe that it is the responsibility of white people to treat black people better, and that black people must and should spend all of their time and energy, or at least an inordinate amount of their time and energy, in an effort to persuade white people, to discover the better angels in white people, I like to put it, to persuade white people to be more kindly disposed towards black folk, then you're an integrationist or an assimilationist. So those are the two camps that exist in and amongst the black community, and that is what I talk about, or what I mean when I make reference to the fact that we need to deal with ideological clarity even before we can have any hope of changing the condition of our people in this country and the rest of the world.